"She doesn't understand," he said, but she understood it all. Eleanor Caldwell's garden shears snipped methodically through the withering hydrangea blooms as Washington, D.C.'s autumn chill settled over the Georgetown brownstone. From the patio, she could hear the low murmur of voices drifting through the partially open window of Daniel's study. Her husband rarely brought his political colleagues home, which made today's impromptu gathering noteworthy. "The Johnson file is a time bomb," a voice Eleanor recognized as Senator Whitman said. "If anyone connects those donations to the offshore accounts—" "Keep your voice down," Daniel interrupted, his tone carrying that familiar edge of controlled authority that had propelled him from congressional aide to the most sought-after political strategist in the Capitol. Eleanor adjusted her wide-brimmed hat and moved closer to the butterfly bush, pretending to inspect for aphids while positioning herself within earshot. She had perfected this dance over 15 years of marriage, the art of being invisible while remaining present. "What about your wife?" Whitman asked. There was a pause, and Eleanor imagined her husband's expression, that slight smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Eleanor? She doesn't understand," he said with absolute certainty. "Politics bores her. She's happier with her charity galas and garden club." Eleanor's hands stilled for just a moment before resuming their methodical pruning. She thought of the encrypted flash drive hidden inside the hollow ceramic owl in her potting shed, containing copies of documents Daniel believed he'd destroyed months ago. "Better that way," agreed Whitman. "Plausible deniability. My wife's the same. Asks why I'm working late, but never what I'm working on." Eleanor pictured the precise moment she'd realized the true nature of her husband's work, not the public persona, the brilliant strategist guiding Senator Morris's presidential campaign, but the shadow architect who manipulated evidence, who silenced whistleblowers, who laundered campaign contributions through a labyrinth of shell companies. She remembered standing in his office at 3 a.m., forgotten in his absence, staring at an email he'd left open about the Johnson situation. That night 3 years ago was when Eleanor had begun keeping records. "We need to contain this before Morris gets wind of it," Daniel continued. "If he thinks there's anything that could taint the campaign, he'd throw you overboard in a heartbeat," Whitman finished. "Man wants the Oval Office too badly." "And he'll get it," Daniel replied with cold confidence. "I've invested too much to let a paper trail derail us now." So as the men moved deeper into the house, Eleanor collected her gardening tools with practiced precision. At 42, she maintained the elegant poise that had first caught Daniel's eye when she was a junior curator at the National Gallery. Back then, he'd been charming, ambitious, but seemingly principled. She had believed he saw her mind, her knowledge of art history, her quiet intelligence. Now she knew better. He'd seen a perfect accessory, cultured enough to impress, demure enough not to threaten, and most importantly, naive enough to ignore the uglier aspects of political ambition. Little did he know that every dismissive "she doesn't understand" had only sharpened her resolve to understand everything. Eleanor placed her garden shears in the toolbox and pulled out her phone. She texted journalist Mia Richards, her former college roommate. "Coffee tomorrow?" The usual place. Then she deleted the message from her sent folder, a habit formed through necessity. The game was accelerating now. Senator Morris was 8 points ahead in the polls with 6 weeks until the election. The Johnson file that so concerned Daniel could unravel everything: the campaign, her husband's career, perhaps even their marriage. Eleanor looked up at the study window, now dark as the men had moved to the dining room. In that moment, she made her decision. After years of watching, waiting, and collecting evidence, the time for passive observation was ending. She would need to decide whether to use what she knew to save Daniel from himself, or to ensure he finally faced consequences for his actions. She brushed soil from her gardening gloves and headed inside to play her role as the perfect political wife who supposedly understood nothing at all. "More coffee, Mrs. Caldwell?" asked Thomas, the barista at Cornerstone Cafe, a small establishment 4 blocks from the Capitol where congressional staffers rarely ventured. "Please," Eleanor replied, checking her watch. Mia was running late, which wasn't unusual given her position as an investigative reporter for the Washington Post. Eleanor had chosen this meeting place years ago for its discretion. No politicians, no lobbyists, just neighborhood regulars who paid no attention to quiet conversations in the corner booth. "Sorry I'm late," Mia said, sliding into the seat across from Eleanor. Her dark hair was pulled into a messy bun, and she carried the perpetually caffeinated energy of someone chasing deadlines. "Your message sounded urgent." Eleanor glanced around before speaking. "The Johnson file. How much do you know about it?" Mia's eyes widened slightly. Interesting question coming from Daniel Caldwell's wife. "Please, Mia, I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important." Mia studied her old friend's face. "Rumors, mostly. Something about campaign finance irregularities connected to Senator Morris. But every time we get close to a source, they clam up." She leaned forward. "Eleanor, what's going on?" Eleanor took a sip of her coffee, considering her words carefully. "What if I told you I might have information? I'd ask why Daniel Caldwell's wife is potentially incriminating her husband to a journalist," Mia replied frankly, "even if that journalist is an old friend." "I'm not incriminating anyone," Eleanor said quietly. "I'm trying to understand what I'm dealing with before I make decisions that can't be unmade." The weight of those potential decisions hung between them. 15 years of marriage, the comfortable life Daniel had provided, the social standing that opened doors and created opportunities for the charitable causes she genuinely cared about. "This isn't just about campaign finance, is it?" Mia asked. Eleanor thought about the encrypted files, documents showing how Daniel had orchestrated the takedown of Senator Morris's primary opponents through manufactured scandals, blackmail, and strategic leaks. How he'd used Eleanor's art world connections without her knowledge to facilitate meetings with wealthy donors whose contributions never appeared in official records. "No," Eleanor finally answered. "It goes deeper." Mia reached across the table, briefly touching Eleanor's hand. "Be careful, Ellie. These people play for keeps. If Daniel suspects you know something—" "He doesn't," Eleanor said with certainty. "That's my protection. He genuinely believes I'm oblivious." She managed a small, bitter smile. "It's actually rather insulting how completely he underestimates me." "When did you first realize?" Mia asked. Eleanor gazed out the window at pedestrians hurrying past. "It wasn't one moment. It was 1,000 tiny inconsistencies, phone calls that ended when I entered the room, names mentioned then never mentioned again. But I think I truly began to see clearly after the Harrington campaign collapsed. The sexual harassment allegations." Mia nodded, recalling the scandal that had destroyed Morris's strongest primary challenger 2 years earlier. "Yes. The night before the story broke, Daniel came home late. He was practically buzzing with energy, opened an expensive bottle of wine. When I asked what we were celebrating, he just said, 'A problem solving itself.' The next morning, the Harrington allegations were everywhere." "That's circumstantial," Mia pointed out. "Alone, yes. But then I found emails discussing how to deploy the allegations for maximum damage. They'd known about the accusations for months, but held them until the strategic moment." Mia's reporter instincts were visibly engaged now. "And the Johnson file. It contains evidence of where the real money behind Morris's campaign comes from. Foreign interests channeled through shell companies." Eleanor lowered her voice further. "And I believe it implicates people much more powerful than Daniel." "Oh, which is why you haven't gone to the authorities," Mia deduced. Eleanor nodded. "Daniel's just one piece of the machine. If I move against him without understanding the full picture—" "You could be putting yourself in danger," Mia finished. Their conversation was interrupted by Eleanor's phone, vibrating with a text from Daniel. "Dinner with the Morrises tonight, 7 p.m. Wear the blue dress." Eleanor showed Mia the message. "Duty calls." As they stood to leave, Mia caught Eleanor's arm. "Whatever you decide to do, be careful. These men have spent their lives destroying people who get in their way." "I know," Eleanor replied, gathering her purse. "That's why I've spent years learning exactly how they do it." The Morrises' Georgetown mansion glittered with old money and new ambition. Eleanor moved through the crowd of political elite with practiced ease, champagne flute in hand, smiling and nodding at appropriate intervals, while Senator Richard Morris regaled guests with campaign trail anecdotes. "Eleanor, you're positively glowing tonight," said Cecilia Morris, the senator's wife of 30 years and a formidable political operator in her own right. "That Valentino is stunning on you." "Thank you," Eleanor replied, accepting the compliment with the requisite modesty. "Though I can hardly compete with you in that Chanel." This was the language they spoke, designer names and superficial flattery, while both women's minds calculated and assessed far deeper matters. "Daniel tells me you've been busy with the Children's Hospital fundraiser," Cecilia continued. Eleanor nodded. "We've nearly reached our goal for the new oncology wing." "Marvelous work. So important to have our purpose while the men handle the rough business of politics." There it was again, the patronizing assumption that Eleanor and women like her were decorative accessories to powerful men, incapable of understanding the rough business their husbands conducted. Across the room, Daniel stood in close conversation with Senator Morris, and two men Eleanor recognized as major campaign donors. Their posture, slightly hunched, voices low, suggested this wasn't casual party conversation. "If you'll excuse me," Eleanor said to Cecilia, "I should circulate." Instead of joining her husband, Eleanor drifted toward the adjacent library, where she knew the catering staff wouldn't intrude. She needed a moment alone to think. The Johnson file weighed on her mind. After meeting with Mia, she'd retrieved the flash drive from its hiding place and reviewed its contents one more time. What she'd found had shaken her more than she'd admitted to her friend. Evidence suggested Morris wasn't just another ambitious politician. The senator was the public face of a network that extended into multiple federal agencies, corporate boardrooms, and foreign governments. The presidency would be merely the culmination of years of positioning these players for unprecedented influence. And Daniel was the architect who made it all look legitimate. Taking a break from the adoring masses? Eleanor startled at Daniel's voice. He stood in the doorway, handsome in his tailored tuxedo, blue eyes sharp with intelligence and something colder. "Just a moment of quiet," she replied, composing herself quickly. Cecilia outdid herself with the guest list tonight. Daniel crossed to the bar cart and poured himself 2 fingers of scotch. "Morris is pleased. The latest polls have him up by 10 points. "That's wonderful news," Eleanor said, watching her husband's face for any sign he suspected her knowledge. "It's going to be a busy final push," he continued. "I may need to spend some nights at the campaign headquarters." Translation. He'd be working late with his inner circle, handling whatever the Johnson situation entailed. "I understand," Eleanor said, the irony of her words not lost on her. "The Garden Club has its autumn planning session anyway." Daniel smiled, that charming expression that had once made her heart race, but now only reminded her of all his masks. "That's why we work, Eleanor. You never demand more than I can give." He crossed to her and kissed her cheek, his hand resting possessively on her waist. "Morris wants to speak with the Richardson Foundation people. Help me find them?" As they rejoined the party, Eleanor noticed Senator Whitman watching them from across the room. His expression was unreadable, but something in his gaze made her uneasy. Hours later, as their driver navigated the quiet D.C. streets toward home, Daniel's phone chimed with a message. He read it, his face momentarily tightening before returning to neutral. "Problem?" Eleanor asked innocently. "Nothing I can't handle," he replied, typing a response before tucking the phone away. "Just campaign matters." Eleanor turned to look out the window at the monuments passing by, illuminated against the night sky. These symbols of democracy and justice stood in stark contrast to the machinery operating in their shadows, the machinery her husband helped control. She thought of the evidence safely hidden away, of Mia waiting for her decision, of the choices narrowing before her. Daniel reached over and took her hand, an automatic gesture without warmth. "You looked beautiful tonight," he said absently, his mind clearly elsewhere. "Thank you," she replied, the perfect political wife until the end. But as they pulled into their driveway, Eleanor noticed an unfamiliar black sedan parked across the street. Through the tinted windows, she could just make out the silhouette of someone watching their home. A chill ran through her that had nothing to do with the autumn night. The following morning, Eleanor sat in her sunroom, laptop open, supposedly working on correspondence for the Children's Hospital Foundation. In reality, she was reviewing an encrypted email from Mia. Sources confirmed Johnson file connected to foreign election interference. Multiple agencies involved. Dangerous territory. Still want to proceed? Eleanor's fingers hovered over the keyboard. The black sedan had remained outside their home until dawn, its message clear. Someone was watching. Whether it was Daniel's allies or his enemies remained unclear. Her phone rang, Daniel calling from campaign headquarters. "Eleanor, I need you to attend the education fundraiser tonight in my place," he said without preamble. "Morris needs me to handle something urgent." "Of course," she replied automatically. "Is everything all right?" A slight pause. "Just campaign matters, nothing for you to worry about." There it was again. The dismissal, the underestimation that had become her greatest asset. "I'll handle the fundraiser," she assured him. "Will you be home late?" "Don't wait up, and Eleanor—" Another pause. "If anyone asks about campaign matters, just refer them to communications." The call ended, leaving Eleanor with a growing certainty that events were accelerating. Whatever crisis the Johnson file had created was reaching critical mass. She closed her laptop and walked to the garden, needing fresh air to clear her thoughts. The ceramic owl watched impassively as she knelt beside it, ostensibly tending to nearby chrysanthemums. Without obvious movements, she retrieved the flash drive from its hiding place. 15 years of marriage, countless social events where she'd been introduced as Daniel's wife, rather than by her name or accomplishments. Years of being underestimated, overlooked, and excluded from meaningful conversation because she doesn't understand, all while she'd been watching, learning, understanding everything. Eleanor made her decision. At her laptop, she composed a response to Mia. "Proceed. Meeting location Alpha. 9 p.m. She then prepared a second encrypted file, insurance that included her own statement detailing how she'd discovered Daniel's activities, coupled with selected documents establishing a timeline of his involvement. This she stored on a separate drive and sealed in an envelope addressed to her attorney, with instructions it be opened only if something happened to her. That evening, Eleanor attended the education fundraiser in a red gown, not the green Daniel had suggested. Small rebellions were all she had allowed herself for years. Now she was preparing for something far more significant. She played her role flawlessly, charming donors and deflecting questions about Daniel's absence with practiced ease, all while aware that tomorrow Washington would awaken to a political earthquake. At 8:30, she excused herself, citing a migraine. Her driver took her not home, but to the National Gallery, closed to the public but accessible to her with the donor pass she'd maintained since her curatorial days. Mia waited in the Renaissance wing, the solemn gazes of centuries-old portraits their only witnesses. "Are you absolutely certain?" Mia asked, as Eleanor handed her the flash drive. "Yes," Eleanor replied simply. "But there's something else you should know. The Johnson file isn't just about campaign finance. It's about an organized effort to place people loyal to specific interests throughout government. Morris is just the most visible piece." Mia nodded grimly. "My editor is preparing for significant blowback. Once this breaks, there's no controlling where it leads." "I understand," Eleanor said, the weight of her choice settling around her shoulders. "When will you publish?" "Tomorrow morning, early." Mia studied her friend's face. "Eleanor, you should consider staying somewhere else tonight. When this breaks—" "No," Eleanor interrupted firmly. "I need to be home when Daniel realizes what's happening." Later that night, Eleanor sat in the darkened living room of their Georgetown brownstone, waiting. At 11:42, headlights swept across the front windows as Daniel's car pulled into the driveway. He entered, loosening his tie, exhaustion evident in the slump of his shoulders. He startled when he saw her sitting in the dimly lit room. "Eleanor, why are you still up?" She studied the man she'd married, brilliant, ambitious, and utterly corrupted by the pursuit of power. "We need to talk, Daniel." Something in her tone made him pause. For the first time in years, he truly looked at her. Not as an accessory or an asset, but as a person capable of independent thought and action. "What's this about?" he asked cautiously. Eleanor set her phone on the coffee table between them, screen facing up so he could see the advance copy of tomorrow's Washington Post headline. "Exclusive, Morris campaign implicated in foreign influence scheme." The blood drained from Daniel's face as he stared at the screen, then at his wife. Understanding dawned in his eyes, not just about the article, but about years of underestimation. "You," he whispered, recognition and disbelief warring in his expression. "All this time, you understood everything." "Yes," Eleanor replied calmly, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I understood it all.